Beyond the fence. The tragedy in Romeoville. The calm before the storm. On the surface, Romeoville, Illinois, was the epitome of suburban peace. But the events that would soon unfold would reveal just how fragile that peace truly was. Neat lawns, quiet streets, and a community where everyone knew each other by name. But peace, as I've learned in my years as an investigator, is often deceptive. Beneath the calm surface, danger lurks, waiting for the perfect moment to shatter everything. My name is Rusty Richards, a retired detective and a man who has spent decades staring into the darkness of human nature. Even now, I can't turn away from the stories that need to be told, the truths that demand to be uncovered. The story of the Rolon-Bartolomei family and the horror that befell them in their own home is one of those truths. A tragedy that transformed a quiet street into a haunting memory. The beginning of the end. The morning of September 17, 2023, began like any other in Romeoville, though the events of the previous night had already set a dark shadow over the town. A slight chill hung in the air as the last remnants of summer faded. Neighbors went about their routines, unaware that just hours earlier, the unthinkable had occurred. Inside a modest home on Concord Avenue, a family lay lifeless: Alberto Rolon, Zoraida Bartolomei, their 2 young sons, and even their 3 dogs. It was a scene that defied explanation. The doors were locked, the house undisturbed from the outside, and yet, inside, everything had changed. The police, responding to a welfare check after Zoraida failed to show up for work, walked into silence, a silence heavy with the weight of what had been lost. Rusty's reflection: I've seen scenes like this before, but nothing ever prepares you for the weight of it. Stepping into that house felt like stepping into a void, a place where love had been replaced by unimaginable loss. A home, a place of safety and comfort, turned into a tomb. And the worst part, the quiet. It's the kind of quiet that screams, pressing down on you, refusing to let you breathe. A home, a place of love and safety, turned into a tomb. And the worst part, the quiet. It's the kind of quiet that screams. Asterisk. The lives they lived. Alberto and Zoraida were the kind of people who made life brighter for those around them. Alberto, meticulous and hardworking, was known for his dedication to his family and his job. Zoraida's warmth and kindness were infectious, her smile lighting up any room she entered. Their sons, though young, were already full of personality, a perfect mix of their parents' best qualities. Neighbors described the family as friendly and approachable, always ready to lend a hand. The boys could often be seen playing in the yard, their laughter echoing down the street. To those who knew them, the Rolon-Bartolomei family represented everything good about their community. Rusty's reflection: that's the cruel irony of tragedies like this. They don't just take lives, they steal the light that those lives brought into the world. And that's a loss that ripples far beyond the walls of their home. Unraveling the mystery. As investigators combed through the house, the questions began to pile up. There were no signs of forced entry, no immediate evidence of a struggle. Whoever did this wasn't a stranger. They knew the family, and the family likely trusted them. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was deliberate, calculated, and cold. Within hours, one name began to surface: Nathaniel Huey Jr. Witnesses described a car matching his vehicle seen near the crime scene the previous evening, and his personal ties to Zoraida Bartolomei quickly drew investigators' attention. A 31-year-old businessman from Streamwood, Illinois, Huey was far from a stranger to Zoraida. He was tied to the family through a tangled web of manipulation and control, a web spun not just by him, but by his partner, Ermalinda Palomo. Introducing the Perpetrators. Nathaniel Huey Jr. appeared to be an ordinary man on the surface. He owned a private security company, presenting himself as a professional and dependable figure. But beneath the surface was a man driven by paranoia and the obsessive need to control those around him. Huey's volatile personality made him a ticking time bomb, and Palomo was the spark that set him off. Palomo's role was as insidious as it was pivotal. Investigators would later uncover how she fabricated a story, using fake social media accounts to convince Huey that Zoraida was a threat. In Huey's already unstable mind, these lies became truth, driving him toward an unimaginable act. Rusty's reflection: it's easy to see Huey as the villain here, and he was. But Palomo? She's the kind of evil that works in whispers, in shadows. She didn't pull the trigger, but she might as well have. The calm before the storm. The evening of September 16th began like any other for the Rolon-Bartolomei family. Zoraida prepared dinner in the kitchen, her boys setting the table with giggles and light-hearted arguments over who got the special plate. Alberto relaxed on the couch, scrolling through his phone, occasionally glancing up to share a smile with his wife. It was a scene of ordinary, beautiful chaos, a family unwinding together at the end of the day. They were at home, surrounded by love, unaware of the danger that was inching closer. Huey and Palomo, however, were already in motion. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was the culmination of weeks of planning, manipulation, and delusion. As the sun set over Romeoville, the family's house stood like any other on the block, a symbol of safety and normalcy. But by the time the sun rose the next morning, it would become a monument to the fragility of life. Rusty's reflection: what makes tragedies like this so unbearable is their inevitability. Once the pieces are in place, the outcome feels as unstoppable as it is devastating. And the worst part, no one inside that house saw it coming. The questions that remain. The events of that night left a void that couldn't be filled, and questions that couldn't be answered. Why did Huey and Palomo target this family? How did their delusions spiral so far out of control? Could this have been prevented? These are the questions that haunted me as I stood outside that house, the weight of the silence pressing down like a physical force. Rusty's reflection: the Rolon-Bartolomei family's story didn't begin with their deaths, and it won't end with their memory. It's a story about how darkness can creep into the light, how manipulation can turn into violence, and how, even in the aftermath of tragedy, we search for meaning. This isn't the end. It's only the beginning, the shadows of their lives. To understand why this happened, we need to go deeper. Into the lives of Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo. Into the twisted web of lies and control they spun. Because somewhere in their darkness lies the truth of what led to that night. No tragedy exists in isolation, and the events of September 16th, 2023 were no exception. To understand the horror that unfolded that night, we must look deeper into the lives of the two people who orchestrated it: Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo. Their story is one of obsession, manipulation, and a slow descent into madness. Nathaniel Huey Jr., a fragile mind. Nathaniel Huey Jr. wasn't born a monster. To those who met him briefly, he seemed like a man who had his life in order. He ran a private security company out of Streamwood, Illinois, presenting himself as a professional and dependable figure. But beneath the polished surface lay a man consumed by paranoia and the need for control. Huey had a volatile personality, one that swung between charm and rage. Former colleagues described him as meticulous, but also as someone who demanded absolute loyalty. Small disagreements could trigger outsized reactions, and as his paranoia grew, so did his instability. Rusty's reflection: I've seen men like Huey before. On the surface, they're functional. They smile, they work, they convince the world they're fine. But underneath, there's a pressure building, a storm waiting for the right moment to break. Huey's paranoia found fertile ground in his relationship with Ermalinda Palomo. She didn't calm his fears, she amplified them, feeding into his delusions until reality and fiction blurred beyond recognition. Ermalinda Palomo, the puppeteer. Ermalinda Palomo was 50 years old when the tragedy unfolded. Unlike Huey, who projected a controlled and professional image, Palomo operated in the shadows. She wasn't just Huey's partner, she was his architect, shaping his paranoia into a weapon. Investigators would later discover that Palomo fabricated elaborate stories to manipulate Huey. Using fake social media accounts, she created the illusion of a cartel conspiracy, convincing Huey that Rolon-Bartolomei was a traitor working against them. To Huey, already teetering on the edge of delusion, these lies were the final push he needed. Rusty's reflection: there's a kind of evil that doesn't need to act directly. It works in whispers, in nudges. Palomo didn't pull the trigger, but every word she spoke, every lie she told, loaded the gun. What remains unclear is Palomo's motive. Was she jealous of Zoraida? Was she driven by a need to control Huey? Or was she caught in her own web of lies, unable to separate the stories she'd spun from the truth? The web of lies. Over time, Palomo's lies grew more intricate. She painted Zoraida as the enemy, convincing Huey that he was under attack. She created fake messages and false evidence, building a narrative that cast the Rolon-Bartolomei family as a threat to their safety. Huey, already prone to suspicion, latched onto these lies with a fervor that terrified those around him. He began surveilling the family, noting their routines, their habits. To him, they weren't neighbors, they were targets. Rusty's reflection: people like Huey don't just snap. They rehearse. They build a story in their minds where they're the hero, where their actions are justified. And by the time they act, they've convinced themselves it's the only option. The Rolon-Bartolomei family, unwitting victims. While Huey and Palomo spiraled deeper into their shared delusions, the Rolon-Bartolomei family went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Alberto Rolon and Zoraida Bartolomei were devoted parents, focused on providing a stable and loving home for their two sons. Their days were filled with ordinary joys, family dinners, walks with their dogs, laughter echoing through their modest home. Neighbors recall seeing Alberto meticulously tending to his lawn, Zoraida chatting with friends, their boys playing in the yard. To the outside world, they were the picture of happiness. But to Huey and Palomo, they were enemies. Rusty's reflection: the scariest part of this story isn't just what happened, it's how it happened. The Rolon-Bartolomei family did nothing to deserve this. They didn't know their kindness, their normalcy, would be twisted into something sinister by two broken minds. The final days. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Huey and Palomo's behavior became increasingly erratic. They purchased firearms, stockpiled supplies, and began making plans. Palomo continued to stoke Huey's paranoia, reinforcing the belief that the Rolon-Bartolomei family was a threat that needed to be eliminated. On September 16, 2023, their plans reached a breaking point. Huey and Palomo drove to the Rolon-Bartolomei home that evening, armed and determined. The family, unaware of the storm about to break, went about their usual routine. Zoraida cooked dinner. Alberto helped the boys with their homework. It was an ordinary night, their last. Rusty's reflection: you don't plan something like this overnight. It's built brick by brick over weeks, months, years. And the worst part is, by the time the plan is in motion, the people it's aimed at have no idea it's coming. The night of horror. The night of September 16, 2023, was like any other in the quiet suburb of Romeoville, Illinois. For the Rolon-Bartolomei family, it was a night of routine and comfort. Zoraida Bartolomei prepared dinner, while her two young boys, Adriel and Diego, argued playfully over whose turn it was to set the table. Alberto Rolon, their loving father, glanced at his phone, content in the moment, unaware that outside their door darkness loomed. Inside the family's modest home on Concord Avenue, laughter and warmth filled the air. But as the evening turned to night, the safety of their sanctuary was shattered by the calculated actions of Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo. The invasion. Huey and Palomo arrived at the Rolon-Bartolomei home under the cover of darkness. Armed and resolute, they had spent weeks convincing themselves that this family was a threat. Their twisted narrative of betrayal and danger had reached a breaking point. For Huey, every step toward the house felt like fulfilling a mission. For Palomo, her role was quieter, but no less complicit. There were no signs of forced entry. Investigators later speculated that Huey might have been let in by someone who recognized him, or that he gained entry through manipulation. Regardless, once inside, his intentions became horrifyingly clear. Rusty's reflection: you walk into these scenes and try to piece together the last moments. Did they have a chance to scream? Did they understand what was happening? Or was it over before they knew they were in danger? These are the questions that stay with you, long after the crime scene is cleared. Moments of terror. What happened inside that house is pieced together from the aftermath. A story told by the positions of the victims, the forensic evidence, and the chilling silence that remained. Alberto Rolon likely confronted Huey first, his instinct as a father driving him to protect his family. Zoraida may have tried to shield her children, their small frames hidden behind her in a desperate act of maternal love. The boys, just 7 and 10 years old, would not have understood the danger. They were innocent, their laughter mere hours earlier replaced by cries that echoed through the walls. Even the family's 3 dogs, loyal and protective, were not spared. Huey's actions were methodical, leaving no witnesses, no chance for survival. Rusty's reflection: the worst part about violence like this isn't the act itself, it's the moments leading up to it. The fear, the realization, the split second when you understand that everything is about to change, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. The aftermath. By the time Huey and Palomo left, the house was silent. The Rolon-Bartolomei family, their laughter, their love, their lives, had been extinguished. Outside, the neighborhood remained unaware, their homes untouched by the darkness that had descended on one of their own. Huey and Palomo fled into the night, their twisted mission complete. But their escape would be short-lived, as the seeds of their capture were already being sown. Rusty's reflection: What's most chilling about people like Huey is how calm they seem afterward. To him, this wasn't chaos, it was control. And in his mind, control meant justification. Discovery of the scene. The next day, September 17th, began with concern. Zoraida failed to show up for work, an uncharacteristic absence that raised alarms among her colleagues. Calls went unanswered, prompting a welfare check at the family's home. When police arrived, they were met with an eerie stillness. The doors were locked, the exterior undisturbed. But inside, they found a scene of unimaginable horror. Alberto, Zoraida, Adriel, Diego, and the 3 dogs were all found deceased. The methodical nature of the crime left investigators stunned. This was not a random act of violence, it was deliberate, cold, and precise. Rusty's reflection: the air in that house was different. Heavy. It's the kind of weight you feel in your chest, the kind that stays with you long after you leave. It's not just the loss of life, it's the loss of everything they were, everything they could have been. The community reacts. As news of the murders spread, the community of Romeoville was plunged into grief and fear. Neighbors who had waved to the family just days earlier now stood outside their homes, searching for answers. How could this happen here? How could a family so full of life be gone in an instant? Vigils were held in the days that followed. Candles flickered in the evening air as names were spoken aloud. Alberto, Zoraida, Adriel, Diego. The community's collective grief was palpable, their resolve to honor the family's memory unwavering. Rusty's reflection: tragedies like this don't just break the people directly involved, they ripple outward, touching everyone. They make us question our safety, our neighbors, and even ourselves. Could we have done something? Could we have seen the signs? The shadows of violence. As the sun set on September 17th, the house on Concord Avenue stood as a grim monument to what had been lost. But for Huey and Palomo, the story wasn't over. Their escape had set the stage for a chase that would bring their twisted journey to an end. Rusty's reflection: this wasn't just a crime, it was a statement. Huey and Palomo didn't just take lives, they destroyed a sense of safety, a belief that home is a place where nothing can hurt you. And that's a wound that doesn't heal easily. The chase. Huey and Palomo thought they could outrun justice. But justice has a way of catching up. What followed wasn't just a pursuit. It was a reckoning, one that revealed the full extent of their desperation and depravity. The chase. The hours following the discovery of the Rolon-Bartolomei family's murder were a blur of grief, confusion, and action. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together what had happened, and as the evidence began to mount, one thing became clear. Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo were no longer in Illinois. Their escape had begun. The immediate hunt. By September 17, 2023, law enforcement agencies across the region had been notified. Alerts were issued for Huey and Palomo, and their vehicle, a black 2008 Dodge Charger, became the focal point of the manhunt. Surveillance footage confirmed that the pair had left Romeoville shortly after the murders, their route taking them westward. Rusty's reflection: when killers run, it's not just about escaping justice. It's about delaying the inevitable. They're not running to something, they're running from the truth. But the truth has a way of catching up, no matter how fast you think you are. Crossing state lines. As Huey and Palomo fled Illinois, their movements were calculated but frantic. Gas station cameras caught fleeting images of them in Missouri, then Oklahoma. Every stop left a breadcrumb. Every mile driven narrowed the gap between them and the authorities. Forensic analysis of their phones revealed erratic communication, messages laced with paranoia and desperation. Rusty's reflection: what's most telling about Huey and Palomo's escape isn't where they went, it's how they went. They weren't strategists, they were scavengers, clinging to any shred of hope they could find. And scavengers always leave a trail, a desperate break. By September 18th, a tip from a vigilant truck driver placed Huey and Palomo near Catoosa, Oklahoma. Local law enforcement, working in coordination with Illinois authorities, moved swiftly. Officers set up surveillance near a motel where the suspects were believed to be hiding. Tensions ran high as the team prepared for what could be a dangerous confrontation. Rusty's reflection: the moments before a takedown are always the hardest. You're balancing preparation with uncertainty, knowing that any wrong move could cost lives. For Huey and Palomo, it was the calm before the storm. For the officers, it was the storm itself, the pursuit. Huey and Palomo's paranoia reached its peak when they spotted police vehicles near the motel. Without hesitation, they bolted, sparking a high-speed chase that tore through the quiet streets of Catoosa. The Dodge Charger swerved dangerously, its tires screeching as Huey pushed the car to its limits. Palomo, seated in the passenger seat, remained silent, her role in their shared chaos unclear even in these final moments. Rusty's reflection: chases like this aren't about escape, they're about control. Huey wasn't running because he thought he'd make it. He was running because it was the only thing left he could control. The final moments. The chase ended abruptly when Huey lost control of the vehicle, crashing into a ditch on a rural stretch of road. Smoke billowed from the car as officers cautiously approached, weapons drawn. Before they could make contact, 2 gunshots rang out from inside the vehicle. When the officers reached the car, they found Huey and Palomo slumped in their seats. Huey had turned the gun on Palomo before taking his own life. Their desperate attempt to escape justice ended in a grim display of finality. Rusty's reflection: in the end, Huey and Palomo weren't running from the police. They were running from themselves. And when they realized there was nowhere left to go, they did the only thing they thought they could. It wasn't justice, it was cowardice. Aftermath. The deaths of Huey and Palomo brought a bitter sense of closure to the case. For the families of the Rolon-Bartolomei victims, it was a mixed blessing. Justice would never be served in court, and the answers to many of their questions died with the perpetrators. The community of Romeoville struggled to reconcile their relief with their grief, their anger with their sorrow. Rusty's reflection: justice isn't always clean. Sometimes it's messy, incomplete, and unsatisfying. Huey and Palomo's deaths didn't bring closure, they brought silence. And in that silence, the echoes of what they did will linger for years to come. The reckoning. The chase for Nathaniel Huey Jr. and Ermalinda Palomo ended on a desolate road far from Romeoville, but the impact of their actions stretched across state lines and into countless lives. Their story was over, but the story of those they left behind was just beginning. Rusty's reflection: every pursuit has an end. But some endings aren't victories, they're reminders. Reminders of what was lost, of what could have been, and of the cost of ignoring the warning signs. The lessons left behind. When the dust settles and the headlines fade, what remains are the lessons. Lessons about control, about manipulation, and about the fragility of the worlds we build. The question is, will we listen? When the dust settles and the sirens fade, what remains is the silence. The tragedy that unfolded in Romeoville on September 16, 2023, left behind more than grief and unanswered questions. It left lessons. Lessons about the fragility of safety, the dangers of unchecked paranoia, and the cost of inaction. But are we willing to learn from them? Recognizing the cracks. Nathaniel Huey Jr. didn't wake up one day and decide to commit murder. His descent into paranoia and violence was a process, a slow unraveling that left clues along the way. Former colleagues described him as controlling and volatile, his need for power often eclipsing reason. Those who knew him saw the cracks forming, but dismissed them as quirks, a dangerous oversight. Rusty's reflection: people like Huey don't operate in a vacuum. Their behavior sends out ripples, warning signs that something is wrong. But too often we ignore those signs, hoping they'll resolve themselves. Tragedy has a way of proving us wrong. For Ermalinda Palomo, her role as a manipulator added another layer of complexity. Investigators uncovered how she fabricated threats, feeding Huey's paranoia until he saw danger in the innocent. Palomo's lies were the scaffolding that supported Huey's delusions, her whispers turning into the loudest voice in his head. The fragility of safety. The Rolon-Bartolomei family represented everything we hold dear about home: love, safety, and normalcy. Their home on Concord Avenue was a sanctuary, a place where laughter echoed and dreams were nurtured. That sanctuary was shattered in one night, reminding us of how vulnerable we are to forces beyond our control. Rusty's reflection: we like to think of our homes as impenetrable, as places where nothing bad can happen. But the truth is, safety isn't a guarantee, it's a fragile construct. And when it breaks, the damage is immeasurable. The community's response. In the wake of the tragedy, the community of Romeoville came together to mourn and remember. Vigils were held, candles lighting up the darkness as names were spoken aloud. Alberto, Zoraida, Adriel, Diego. The collective grief was palpable, but so was the resolve to honor the family's memory by ensuring their loss was not in vain. Yet, amidst the unity, there was also fear. Neighbors questioned their own sense of security, their trust in the world around them shaken. The Rolon-Bartolomei family's deaths weren't just a loss, they were a fracture in the community's foundation. Rusty's reflection: Tragedy doesn't just affect the people directly involved. It ripples outward, touching everyone it passes. In Romeoville, that ripple turned into a wave, forcing people to reevaluate what they thought they knew about safety, about trust, about each other. The dangers of manipulation. Palomo's role in the tragedy cannot be understated. Her ability to manipulate Huey's fears and turn them into actionable violence highlights the dangers of unchecked influence. Whether motivated by jealousy, control, or her own delusions, Palomo's actions were a catalyst for disaster. Rusty's reflection: the most dangerous lies are the ones that feel like truth. Palomo didn't just lie to Huey. She created a reality for him, one where violence felt like the only solution. And in doing so, she became just as culpable as the man who pulled the trigger. Could this have been prevented? The question that haunts every tragedy is whether it could have been stopped. In this case, the answer is painfully complex. The signs were there: Huey's growing paranoia, his volatile behavior, Palomo's manipulative tendencies. But recognizing those signs and acting on them are two very different things. Rusty's reflection: it's easy to look back and see the red flags. It's harder to act on them in the moment. But if there's one thing we can take from this, it's the importance of paying attention, of speaking up, of taking action before it's too late. The legacy of loss. For the loved ones of Alberto, Zoraida, Adriel, and Diego, the loss is incalculable. No amount of justice, no number of vigils can bring them back. But their story serves as a reminder of what's at stake when we ignore the warning signs, when we allow manipulation and paranoia to fester unchecked. Rusty's reflection: the Rolon-Bartolomei family deserved better. They deserved a life full of love, laughter, and dreams fulfilled. Instead, they became a cautionary tale. But even in their absence, they have the power to teach us, to push us to be better, to protect the light they brought into the world, carrying the lessons forward. The tragedy in Romeoville was a stark reminder of the fragility of our worlds, of the cracks that can form when we're not paying attention. But it was also a call to action, to listen, to intervene, to ensure that the lives lost were not in vain. Rusty's reflection: scars don't just remind us of what we've lost, they remind us of what we must protect. The Rolon-Bartolomei family's story isn't over. It's in the lessons we learn, the changes we make, and the way we carry their memory forward. Because in the end, that's what matters most, turning loss into purpose. The final reflection. As we step back and look at the bigger picture, one question remains: what does justice mean in the face of such overwhelming loss? The answer isn't in the courts, it's in the hearts of those left behind. The final reflection. Every tragedy leaves behind two things: scars and questions. The scars, while painful, fade over time. But the questions remain, haunting those who were closest to the loss and echoing in the minds of a community searching for answers. For the Rolon-Bartolomei family, their story will forever be remembered, not only for its unimaginable loss, but for the light they brought to those around them. Their legacy serves as a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in the face of darkness. The unanswered questions. What drives someone like Nathaniel Huey Jr. to commit such acts of violence? Was it his paranoia? The lies spun by Ermalinda Palomo? Or a toxic combination of both? These are the questions that linger, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Palomo's role, while manipulative and destructive, remains shrouded in ambiguity. Was she a victim of Huey's control, or was she the architect of his delusions? Rusty's reflection. We always search for the why, as if understanding it will lessen the pain. But sometimes the why isn't enough. Sometimes there is no justification, no reason that can make sense of the senseless. For the community of Romeoville, the question of how this could happen remains equally troubling. The Rolon-Bartolomei family was not involved in crime or conflict. They were a loving, ordinary family. Their only mistake was being seen through the distorted lens of Huey and Palomo's delusions. The role of justice. With Huey and Palomo's deaths, traditional justice became an impossibility. There would be no trial, no opportunity for the Rolon-Bartolomei family's loved ones to confront those who had taken everything from them. For many, this lack of closure is its own kind of injustice. Rusty's reflection. Justice isn't just about punishment, it's about understanding. It's about giving the victims a voice, a chance to be heard. Huey and Palomo's death silenced that opportunity, leaving a void that no verdict can fill. In the absence of formal justice, the community turned inward, finding ways to honor the family's memory. Vigils, fundraisers, and memorials became acts of resistance against the darkness that had touched their town. The fragility of normalcy. Romeoville was a place where people felt safe, where neighbors waved to each other from their driveways and children played in the streets. The tragedy shattered that sense of normalcy, leaving a scar on the town's collective psyche. Rusty's reflection. Safety is something we take for granted until it's gone. When a tragedy like this happens, it doesn't just take lives, it takes the sense of security that holds a community together. And rebuilding that trust is one of the hardest things to do. The power of memory. For the loved ones of Alberto, Zoraida, Adriel, and Diego, memory is both a comfort and a burden. It is in the laughter captured in old photographs, the echoes of their voices in cherished videos. But it is also in the absence, the empty chairs at the dinner table, the quiet where there should be noise. Rusty's reflection. Memories are a double-edged sword. They remind us of the joy we had, but they also remind us of what's been taken. Yet, it's those same memories that keep the people we've lost alive in our hearts. The community's efforts to preserve the family's legacy became a testament to the impact they had. Murals were painted, scholarships established in their names, and moments of silence observed to ensure they would never be forgotten. The lessons learned. Perhaps the most important legacy of the Rolon-Bartolomei family is the lessons their tragedy left behind. It is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked paranoia, of the devastating power of manipulation, and of the need to intervene when we see the warning signs. Rusty's reflection. The hardest lessons are the ones taught by loss. But if we're willing to learn, those lessons can make us better, more vigilant, more compassionate, more willing to act when something feels wrong. The final reflection. As I stand outside the house on Concord Avenue, the air feels heavy, the silence almost deafening. The house is no longer just a home. It's a monument to what was lost and a warning of what can happen when darkness goes unchecked. Rusty's reflection. This story isn't just about one family, one tragedy. It's about all of us. It's about the cracks we ignore, the red flags we dismiss, the chances we miss to make things right. The Rolon-Bartolomei family's light was extinguished too soon, but their story doesn't have to end here. It lives on in the lessons we take from it, in the changes we make, in the love we choose to spread instead of hate. Ending the journey. The tragedy in Romeoville will never be forgotten. It is a scar on the community, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance. But it is also a testament to resilience, to the ability of people to come together in the face of unimaginable loss and to find hope in the darkness. Rusty's reflection. Every scar tells a story, and every story has the power to change us. The Rolon-Bartolomei family's story is one of love and light, stolen by darkness but not extinguished. And as long as we remember, as long as we learn, that light will continue to shine,